there. All right. So that was about the animation, and now let's talk about some dynamic systems built in Maya. So if you go under FX down here, again, you'll see some new objects. So let me just show you what that means. So let's say now I'm going to define some actual real physics rules in the environment so that they can follow gravity and collision and that kind of thing. So let's say I want to make that to be my ground, and I want to have a sphere fall onto it. If I go up here under fields and solvers, I'll just put it there to have. There are these two things, the rigid body, the active rigid body and passive rigid body. They are the characteristic of something following the rules of physics in relation to each other. So the passive rigid bodies are the things that are not moving, and the active ones are the ones that are active, apparently. So if I select my base and call this a passive rigid body, and then select that and call this an active rigid body, and I play, I'll see nothing is happening. But as soon as I put in a force like gravity in the ground, and then I play, I see my ball is coming down and it's bouncing off the ground. So there, like that. And you can be more creative and do some more interesting things with it. So if you have, let's say, if you create a few different balls in the gym, maybe I should use boxes, and then make this an active rigid body and play and see. Oops. Active rigid body doesn't do that. Okay, make a new one. This time I'll do a box. Put it inside, make it a passive rigid body, go to my first frame and bring it a bit higher, and then play. Now you can see it's a little bit too close to that. I want it to fall off the edge. So I'll just move it a little bit there. Play it again. So whenever you go to the beginning of the animation, it will start simulating again. So you can see it's hitting the corner and it's coming off. So by using active and rigid solid bodies, you can define these kind of behavior, and then you can put in all these kind of forces that I'll show an example of later in the field, and just have some animation happening. The other thing that is interesting to know is the notion of cloth. So if you have, let's say, a plane, and you want it to act as a cloth in the environment, there's this tool called nCloth that is very simple. So you can just select, I'm just gonna delete these and make another sphere down here, and give this one some subdivision. Delete that. There. Maybe a 20 by 20. nCloth. I would create an nCloth. So that is my nCloth now. And I will select the sphere and call it nCloth and my passive collider. I would go move this up a little bit. I will just play. You can see it's coming up and acting as a cloth, touching the sphere and falling off of it. If you have your cloth selected, you can go to your attribute editors, and then from up here, if you have your nCloth selected, you can change different presets. So there are some things built in the model for you. You can go through these and have some fun with different things. Usually a rubber sheet is an interesting one that does some interesting behavior in the scene. Also, there are some that are more flexible, like you can even define this as lava or honey. And if I go back and play it as honey, I think I didn't apply. So if I go preset honey replace, go to the beginning and play again, you can see how it will react differently. So that's why we use rubber sheets, not honey, in buildings. And then you can also do some where's the metal thing? You can define some water balloons and t-shirts and silks and some heavier sheet metal maybe, and then just play that and see how that would affect. As you would expect, it's not really changing that much. So it's very interesting. Just assume you have your proxy. You can put things, you can throw things at it, or you can fall it off of some other geometry and see what it will create for you. Another thing I wanted to show is if you have your outliner open, so as soon as you create an enclosure in your environment, you'll get this nucleus thing created in the thing, and that is actually controlling your environmental properties and features. So let me just go back and change the presets here to rubber sheet and go to my nucleus and change. Now I've got the power to even change the gravity and change the direction of it. And let's say, yes, gravity is going down. I want, in this case, to go to the side a little bit as well, and then play. Now you can see gravity is stronger because it was on 50, and I can make gravity go sideways instead of going downwards. And that would be this. So those are a few other things you can do. Also, if I delete everything in the scene, again, you can make a plane, select that, go to your enclosure, and make it a passive collider, and then maybe make a box. Always remember to give it some subdivisions. Let's say, in this case, 20 by 20 by 20, and bring it up. Then I can define this an enclosure, create enclosure, and give it a different preset. So maybe here I would define it as a water balloon. Then I'll play to see what results it will give me. Okay. There is some other tools you can use here that are also cool. You can define some constraints. So let's say I go to my vertices and select a few of them there. So select a few of these up here and go to my end constraints and just make them transform constraints and then play my animation. You can see that these points are fixed in the environment trying to hold my balloon up, but it is falling down because of the gravity. So if I want to mess with it a bit more, I can go to my nucleus and increase my gravity because I've got the power. And then I'll go back and play. Now you can see the gravity is really holding this down, and those constraints are really holding it up, and how you can generate different forms from it. At the same time, I can add some other forces to my scene. So going back to the fill and solvers, you can see that you have all these different options to generate something that would have some effects on your scene. So for example, in this case, I would just make an air fan and put it here. Then down here, I would select the direction of how this is blowing the air. So this is X. I will put it -10, and I will really make it high, like 300. Then if I have my object selected and shift select the fan, if I go in my fields and assign to select it, now when I play, it should also be so maybe the box is very heavy, so I'll give it a way bigger number. Um, also, the place of this is important, so I'll bring it a bit closer. There. Now when I go from the beginning and play, okay, that's because the wind was very strong and there's no object left. Stop, going to the beginning. Did I delete the object or is it still the wind? Deleting the wind, the object is not back. So undo, 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 undo. Okay, where did the object go?
Could blow it away.
Yeah.
Did you hide it on accident?
Maybe. It doesn't show up here at all, so it's gone. I'll make a new one. This time I'll make a surface so that it's more obvious what the wind is doing to it. Make it a 20 by 20. Bring it up. Define it as an end cloth. And then go to my vertices, select a few. Define them as end constraints, transform constraints. Give this an interesting preset. In this case, I'm gonna again use my rubber sheet and then have my object selected, shift select the fan, go to the fields, and then assign to selected. So hopefully this time it should work. I'll select my fan and make sure it's not that big number. Now when I play, this is falling off and the wind is kind of blowing into it, as you can see. I can go back to my nucleus and again even make the gravity stronger to bring it down and also make the wind stronger at the same time. Go back and play. And I can move my fan a bit closer, then play it again. Now you can see how it is generating this geometry. So I assume if you were wanting to model something like this, and let's say at this moment is interesting, you just want to make a duplicate out of it and pause the animation. And I can argue if you wanted to okay, Control D, duplicate, going there, moving it aside. Okay, if you wanted to model something like that, you would have a hard time figuring out how to do it, but using a few of these tools, you have the opportunity to play with it a bit more. So I'm going to show you guys a few other examples that I've prepared for today, and I think that would be it. And there are a lot of examples. So, okay, so the basic end cloth. So you see this one that I showed the image of from the beginning is basically generated from these spheres falling into that cloth. Or sorry, the other way, the cloth is going down on top of the spheres. So you can see how that is happening. And then I have duplicated different scenes of this and just moved them aside. Next example, there are some spheres going into the cloth. And then I have again duplicated some of the geometries to store how this is causing an effect, and then you have control over all the different properties, and these are constraints that are animated themselves. So as I said, you can animate anything, even the constraints or anything you put in place, you can move them around and animate them. And you can see how this is creating this kind of an interesting effect for you. Next one. Is that. So I have made this kind of tent structure with a few constraints and just let the gravity create that form for it. So let's say you're working on a structure that you wanted to test and see what the final form will be. Playing with a few of the properties in Maya, you can easily simulate that real-life experience. Next one, I'm going to show the use of the wind in design. So to get the geometry like that, so very similar to the previous object, I've added a few more constraints, as you can see, to these ends. And then when I play from the beginning, you can see there is a wind force over here, and there are some constraints, and my geometry is falling into the gravity force, and it is creating all these different forms that I can duplicate at any moment that I want. This is also interesting. So I tried to be a bit more creative with the constraints here. So I picked a few faces and a few vertices here. You can see in the how I have rotated and moved some of these constraints around. And then when I play the animation, these are moving themselves and rotating around. And the objects are having all these, I would call, interesting effects happening on them. Just a few more. Okay, I'm going to show you that. 2 more to go. So this could also be interesting. You could actually crash a geometry with throwing things at it. So let's imagine that was your proxy, and you would throw some spheres at it and see how it would change, and then pause it whenever you like it. Control D and move it to the side. And then the last thing I want to show is another example of a field force, the Newton field force. That again is pretty interesting. I would play that. Okay, I think it's baked. Okay, I'll show you how to make this happen, and then that's the last thing. So I'll just make a new scene. I would create a box here and give it the subdivisions it deserves. And then I will go to my field solvers, putting the Newton field. As you can see, it shows up in the outliner. It's very small there. If it's selected here from the attributes, I can go and change the sizes of it and the scale. So let's say 10 by 10 by 10. And then I can also give it a volume control. So the volume shape, for this case, I'm going to say sphere. And then when I have my box selected, and then shift select that, and go to field solver and assign to selected, if I play, it is moving my object around a little bit. But if I give it more power, let's say instead of 5, make it 100, and then play, it's doing it more, and I can even make it bigger. And see kind of that. You could also easily deform my geometry if you play with the characteristics and properties a little bit. And then through this deformation, you can generate some of these forms that I was showing here in this. So these are all generated from a simple box using that tool. Questions?
Just want to contextualize this a little bit.
Sure.
If you recall the lecture that I gave